Hello, welcome everyone to another Artist Loft drawing class. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and tonight's class is on perspective drawing, using perspective drawing skills to draw a coffee mug. So we're going to be reviewing very briefly some basics of linear perspective. And we did have a previous class on, or a few classes on linear perspective, and Raina can drop some of the, or a link to the intro to linear perspective class that we had back in September, I believe, in the chat. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, it was Intro to Linear Perspective was the name of that class. If you need a refresher on linear perspective, but I'm also going to walk you through step by step to drawing this coffee mug using perspective drawing. So even without that class, I think you should be able to follow along. I'm also going to be referencing one other class from this series. It was the very first class that we did. It was called Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms. And in that class, we drew a still life item, and we recognized all of the contours of that form. And we're going to be doing a similar thing with the coffee mug tonight. So go ahead and switch to my tabletop view here. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and follow me on Instagram, or you can tag me directly with your post as well, so that I'll be sure to see it. And here's a few of my business cards with some of my work. If you're interested in the work that I do personally, or what you maybe see behind me in my studio, you can follow me on Instagram, like I said, or I'm on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. Yeah, so there's all the places you can find me. We are going to be using Artist Loft sketching pencils tonight. I've got I think just a drawing and sketching kit on the supply list. You'll want a synthetic eraser or any eraser. You'll want a ruler and some sketching paper. And then if you don't have a coffee mug that you'd like to use yourself and you'd like to follow along with me, I've got 3 reference images that were in the supply list that you can refer to that show you a fixed view of this coffee mug here, from 3 different points of view. So in one point of view, the eye line is in line with the bottom of the mug. In the second image, the eye line is in the center of the mug. And then in the third one, the eye line is above the mug. So in one, we're looking down at the mug and the inside of the mug. The other one, we're looking at the side of it straight on. And then the other one, we're looking up at the mug. So any questions about just supplies or getting started or anything like that?
So, yes, Lynn, the reference image, you should be able to print them directly or view them on your computer.
Okay, and
that's the only one I'm seeing.
Okay, great. And yeah, I don't have the printouts, but I've got the mug in question here, the one from the reference images. So I'll be referring to that, but you won't necessarily be able to see my mug off screen while I'm drawing. So those reference images are very helpful to use. Or if you are wanting to work from, a coffee mug that you have in front of you, you can just set it up on the table in front of you. You're going to want at least some sort of height. So maybe get a stack of books or something for the reference where we're looking at the coffee mug from below, where our eye line is in line with the bottom of the mug. You're going to want to get the mug elevated so that it is, the bottom of the mug is in line with your eye line. So as you're drawing, you'll want that to be elevated, or I guess if you could have a seat that you could lower so that you're lowering your eye line so that it's in line with the bottom of the mug. And then, yeah, you'll want your eye line to be in line with the center of the mug. So maybe get a couple more books to get it, or no, take a couple books away to get it, the middle of it in line with your eye line. And then this one, it would just be sitting on the table in front of you where you're looking down at it. Typically, when we're drinking from a coffee mug, we can see inside of it, right? If it's sitting in front of us, it's below our eye line. Okay, so I'm just going to review really briefly here what you will find in that intro to linear perspective video. If you were to refer back to that. So all geometric forms and even organic forms that we view in space around us, we see them according to the point of view that we are viewing them. So perspective refers to the viewer's point of view, and it changes depending on where the viewer is in reference to that form or that object. So just very briefly, I'm just going to explain the differences between 1, 2, and 3-point perspective and how that applies to the coffee mug, and then we're going to move on. I'm not going to go all the way into everything with linear perspective because that would take an entire class, and there is a class you can refer back to. But in 1-point perspective, basically we are typically in the middle of something. You're in the middle of a hallway, you're in the middle of a road, and you're looking at the front or the side of a geometric form, and you are seeing the orthogonal lines, which are the parallel lines that are traveling away from the viewer. So parallel lines do not intersect. They are either horizontal or vertical. They're straight and they do not intersect. But in linear perspective, or when we view an object from a certain angle, it appears that the parallel lines, the horizontal parallel lines that are traveling away from the viewer towards the horizon line, which also depends on the viewer's eye line. The horizon line usually falls in line with the viewer's eye line. So these orthogonal lines will appear to converge at this one point on the horizon called a vanishing point. And in 2-point perspective, the only thing that changes is that rather than standing in the middle of a road or in the middle of a hallway or the middle of a room looking at these geometric forms, you're now standing at a corner. There's a corner in your view. And so now it appears that the horizontal parallel lines on one side of the corner are traveling to a vanishing point on the horizon. And then everything on the other side of the corner, or the parallel horizontal lines that are traveling away from the viewer's eye, appear to converge at a second vanishing point. So this is all an optical illusion that changes depending on where you are standing in space. And then, if that's not confusing enough, when the viewer is either far above or far below, or the viewer's eye line is far above or far below the horizon line, we have what's called 3-point perspective, which is really going to apply to what we're doing with the coffee mug tonight, because we're going to be looking at the coffee mug from either below, our eye line is going to be below the object, or our eye line is going to be far above the object, right? We typically would not see a building, like this in space, but since this object is so much smaller than us, the way that we're going to be drawing it is going to be technically in 3-point perspective, because we're going to have a zenith point, and that's why I drew the triangles in this sketch. And I'll explain all that, in regards to the coffee mug. I'm just doing a really brief review here. So in 3-point perspective, what's happening is now we have a third vanishing point. So, and I forgot to mention in my brief run through of 1 and 2-point perspective, the only thing that is changed in 1 and 2-point perspective are the horizontal parallel lines. And I said that, but I forgot to mention that the vertical lines remain straight. So the vertical lines on this box and this box remain straight in 1-point perspective. In 2-point perspective, same thing. The vertical lines remain straight and perpendicular to the horizon line. But in 3-point perspective, now the vertical lines are also appear to be skewed. And they're not actually skewed. It's an optical illusion that we all understand when we look at the world. Like if you see a building from an airplane, you don't look down at that building and say, wow, that skyscraper is much wider at the top than it is at the bottom. At the bottom, it's somehow more narrow. No, we all understand that it's an optical illusion that we're seeing that makes it appear that the building becomes more narrow as it, goes farther down to the ground. It's just an optical illusion. Okay, so that is my very brief review of 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. And if you want the full review, you can check out that video. There's actually a follow-up to that video that is perspective drawing studies, where I go even more in depth to explaining all that. And then there's a little bit more in that series. We did a whole like 3-part class on doing a 2-point perspective mixed media drawing. Anyway, you can find all of those on YouTube. Okay,
Oh,
so
Nellie wanted to know about the erasers again, and Pat wants to know what zenith means.
oh, okay. So the zenith point is and then about the just any eraser is fine. You just want to have an eraser. Synthetic eraser is what I've got here, the Artist Loft synthetic eraser. Okay, and then yeah, the zenith point is just, so the vanishing points are the ones that we have on the horizon line, which is again, changes depending on the viewer's perspective. And so this zenith point is where, so if the vanishing points are where the orthogonal lines, the horizontal parallel lines that travel to, concede at a point on the horizon, the vertical lines are now receding towards an imaginary point, and we call that the zenith point. I'm sure that doesn't answer all of your questions about zenith points, but I don't have the time to, go into in depth in perspective drawing, but that's why I'm referencing those other classes that you can check out if you need some perspective drawing help. I'm also doing a Q&A after these classes on Wednesday nights. I always hop over to my Instagram at the end of the class at 7:05 p.m. Central Time. So just directly after this class, I'll be on Instagram live at Adrienne Hodge Art for about 30 minutes answering any questions. So if you have any lingering questions that don't get answered about how to draw a coffee mug at the end of the night, you can join me there. Okay, so moving on to the coffee mug. All right, so I've got my coffee mug off to the side here, and this is a handmade coffee mug by a friend of mine in Austin. She's Katie Ann Clay on Instagram, just, at Katie Ann Clay is her name, or her handle on Instagram, and she's lovely, and I love this mug, and it's just so satisfying to make my coffee and tea out of a handmade mug. And I thought I'd just plug her a little bit there, since I am using a friend's handmade mug there. Okay, so we're just gonna dive in with this. I've got my sketch paper, and I'm gonna try to get to about the same point with with my drawings tonight as I did here. I maybe might not have as much shading and value, but we're definitely going to map out these various perspectives on this mug in this way. And the other class that I referenced to the intro to drawing forms, that's the other thing that I'm going to be doing tonight is we're going to be outlining the, oh, I just lost my little apple drawing again. I got too much stuff on my desk. Let me find that. Well, I'll find it again in a second when we get there. Okay, I was just gonna show you the picture of the apple and how I outlined the contour lines one more time. So I'm just gonna start with a 4H pencil so that I'm drawing nice and light. Although actually I'm gonna use a darker pencil so that you guys can see my lines, but I suggest that you start with a 4H or a 2H so that you can easily erase your lines if you need to. And you don't have to do all of 3 of these on the same page. If you want to do them on separate pages, that's fine. I just, kind of did that to make it look cool for the promo image, So I might go a little bigger this time just for the sake of time, not trying to squeeze all of them onto one page here. So I'm going to start with a triangle. And this is the beauty of having something like a mug that's not necessarily a building in space that we're trying to render in perfect perspective here. We're going to just, create the perspective plane for this mug to fall within. So I'm going to start with a triangle. And you don't need to measure anything necessarily. Just try to get your triangle to be fairly, like a right triangle, all sides equal length there. Okay, and then we're going to draw our the first one where the eye line is at the bottom of the mug first. So sketching nice and light with your H pencil so that you can easily erase your lines. We're just going to sketch the basic shape of the mug, and we're not worrying about the contours or anything too much here. So what's happening in 3-point perspective is if we're looking up at the form, that zenith point is at the top, right? So this is what we call worm's eye point of view. Because it's like a worm looking up at this this form, right? And then this one is referred to as bird's eye because we're looking down. So in the worm's eye point of view, the recession is happening at the top of the form, right? And it just so happens when we look that this mug does get more narrow at the top. But if we were, really smaller than the object, like it maybe would appear to get more narrow. So if you're looking up at a coffee mug from a very skewed point of view, it may appear to slightly narrow at the top. So if you're drawing a different coffee mug, then just, notice if that's happening. And I'm not going to worry about getting my coffee mug perfect in this sketch because I more want to illustrate how to get it in proper perspective than I want to perfectly render it. So I'm looking for a fishbowl shape for my mug. Your mug may be different if you're not using my reference images. And then we're going to do a half heart or question mark. With a little bit of a lip at the bottom there. And then we want the double side to our question mark or half of a heart shape. And that is the basic form of our mug, except for we do have this little, like a fishbowl lip at the top. Oh, I curved it the wrong way because I'm looking. This is why it's good to have your, I did not actually position my mug in that way in front of me, but if it was that way, it would appear like, let's just look at it from underneath a little bit. It appears that the top of the mug is curving up, right? So this is kind of where I think the brain stretching is going to come in the most tonight, is thinking about the contour lines. So in that class, Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms, I spend a lot of time with a physical string and an apple, just wrapping the string around the apple and noting all the different ways that the elevational lines curve on the apple. It's not perfectly round, right? It's in some areas it might be kind of narrow, it might be kind of straight, like these vertical lines appear almost straight in a few areas because the apple isn't, it gets kind of flat on the sides going down, but then the horizontal lines remain curved. And when I drew this apple, I was looking down at it, right? So most of the horizontal contour lines appear to curve down. But in this first view of the coffee mug here, we're looking at it from below. And so it appears, if we were to take a string, there's a slight curve. Like if I were to wrap a string around this coffee mug, there's a slight curve that's curving up, all the way up the mug and on the horizontal axis. And then at the top, it's also curving up. And even this appears to, well, it depends on your point of view, like how elevated you got your mug. It may slightly curve down. It may be almost straight and in line. In the photograph that I provided, there was a slight curve down. So that's what I did here. And then on the top of my fishbowl shape, I need to curve it up. That's why it's good to draw light with an H pencil so you can erase if you fudged any of your contour lines like I just did. Okay, so now we're just going to sketch in those contour lines just so that that makes a lot of sense here. So on our horizontal axis, we've got a curve up. So all of these, everything pretty much until we get to that eye line. So you can go ahead and label the eye line for yourself. And then when we start getting closer to the eye line, note how that curve gets a little harder to see because it starts to feel almost straight near the bottom. So I kind of continued to curve a little too much here. It's actually kind of good that I don't have those reference photos right in front of me, because then you can see what happens when you don't refer to a reference photo and you try to draw from your imagination. That's why it's always good to have a reference to look at, because it's easy to get away from what the object is actually doing when you're imagining it, like I kind of was a little bit there. Okay, so when I look at that, that doesn't give me the whole picture, right? Because there's something very important that I'm missing, and that's what's happening on the vertical axis. So I'm going to draw a straight line from that, technically the zenith point that we created at the top of the triangle, straight line down. And then now let's observe what's happening on the vertical axis. And the reason why this coffee mug is so helpful is there's these little grooves that were taken out of the clay as she was shaping the mug. And they almost create vertical lines that you can see. And so if I were to imagine a vertical, line of latitude right here, it might be, imagine that there's a straight line in the middle, and notice how those vertical curves are curving to the left on this side of that straight line, and then they're curving out to the right on that side of the straight line. So it's easy to notice what's happening on those contours because the pattern on the mug kind of actually does that. So to the left of that vertical axis equatorial line, we've got this curve in this direction, and then to the right we've got a curve out in the other direction on the other side of that vertical axis. And the way that this would affect, let's say you've got some writing on your mug. I'm just going to grab a bottle of ink that I have here that I work with, just to illustrate this. So if we're looking at, a cylinder, which the coffee mug is technically a cylinder, because we typically would have straight lines on the vertical axis and then curved lines on the horizontal axis in a typical cylinder, but the coffee mug is just rounded on, on this coffee mug it's rounded, but if you have a typical coffee mug, it might be straight, more of a cylinder. My point is, if there's writing on your mug, if you have any text on the mug, the text is going to curve out in relationship to the contours as well. So like on Winsor and Newton, even though there is a curved line to Winsor and Newton there, oh, it doesn't want to focus on it. There we go. Or here, let's look at where it says for fountain and dip pens right there. See how there's a slight, because it's following the curve of the cylinder, right? So if I were to draw this lettering, I would have to account for the curve that's happening to the cylinder underneath it. I wouldn't want to write this text straight across the cylinder. Otherwise, it's going to look like it's not a part of the cylinder. It's going to look separate. It's going to look like it's floating. It's not going to look attached. So just keep that in mind, that if you had, let's say, the word coffee on here, the C, everything's going to be following the curve of the contours. You wouldn't want to write that, like if I just wrote coffee across that doesn't look like it's a part of the mug, right? But if I shape the letters in a way that follow that curve, it's subtle, but then it's going to look like it's actually, the top of the letters would follow this slight curve up all the way across, and then it's going to look like the text is on the mug, right? Okay, cool. All right, so those are our vertical lines and horizontal contour lines for that view of the coffee mug. And I'm just going to do this for all of them, and then we'll go back and see how much time we have to add any shading or value. But for those of you who've been with me for a lot of classes in this series, you're probably already sketching in your value shapes. I hope you are, that are going to follow the relationship of the contour lines as well. So in the reference image that I provided, there's a heavy shadow that goes along the rim here at the top, and it falls like that. So as you add your shapes of shadows, you want to make sure that those are following your contour lines. Same as the text that I just illustrated. You don't want to just put your value shape on there kind of floating like that word coffee. You want to make it curve with the contours like the start of that lettering that I did there. So all of these value shapes need to follow the same curve. And I think I kind of pushed the shadow along the bottom there because I just wanted to have a shadow, but there was a bit of a shadow in that reference image. So you can put that in, and if you've got time, go ahead and start to fill in. Switch to I said I wasn't going to do this right now, and then I started doing it anyway. I'm just going to do it really quick. But you could switch to a 6B or a 4B and start to fill in some of those heavier shadows. But yeah, I just put a little bit of value in my sketch for these drawings. I wanted it to be more about how to render the form and understand why the view is shifting and how to illustrate different points of view, because that's just the hardest thing when we're drawing any geometric form. If we don't understand just the basic rules of perspective and how they change according to your point of view. So if you were drawing this coffee mug and you started out, sitting right in front of it, and then you go and, get another cup of coffee or something, and you come back and you bump it a little bit, or you scoot it away, or you move, then your view of that coffee mug is going to be completely different, and your drawing is going to be affected if you don't take note of any adjustments that need to be made because you moved or because the subject moved. Okay, so in our next view of the coffee mug, we're going to start with a rectangle, not a triangle. So we'll take our ruler and just draw a nice fat rectangle here. Doesn't really matter, just as much space as you want to take up on the paper, or if you're trying to squeeze it in all on one page like I did the other one, then you can measure how big the boxes and triangle need to be. But if you don't care, we're just drawing a box. Let me get that looking straight for you guys. And then again, we're just going to sketch the basic form of the mug according to that photograph, that fishbowl shape. So in this one, we are looking at it head on. So in the last one, I kind of tipped it up so that we could see how the lines were curving up. But in this one, we want to look at it as head on as possible, so that the eye line, the implied eye line, is right in the center. So if you made a stack of books and put your coffee mug on that, you want the center of the mug, the horizontal center, the equator, to be right in line with your eye line. And taking a photograph might make it easier to note that. If you're just looking at it, it might be kind of tricky to get it lined up with your eye line, but grabbing your camera and just using your camera to find that equator line might be helpful. So now what we observe is that we've got two equator lines. Well, we had the equator line in the other one, but it was just at the bottom, and this time it's more of an equator because it's in the middle. So, or our horizon line, I shouldn't have called it an equator line in the other one. In this one, it's an equator. So we'll just go ahead and draw those now. So it doesn't have to be perfectly in the middle, just an approximate middle of your box. We'll do some intersecting lines that intersect about in the middle. And then we'll draw that fishbowl shape, or whatever shape your mug is. So it is very similar to the first one in that the bottom of the shape was curving is curving down and the top of the shape is curving up. But the line where the horizontal lines become straight is more towards the middle now. I forgot to put that lip in again, and I didn't make it quite as wide, but that's okay. Make it a little wider. I'm gonna switch to a 2H while I try to get my lines. A little more where I want them. Okay, and then we've got that question mark or half heart shape. The little connector piece here at the bottom. Oh, and I forgot to add the contour lines to the handle in my other drawing. Let me go back to that other one for just a minute and illustrate that, because that's definitely something I know people might have questions about when you get to your handle on your mug. So, you know, you really have to just look at it and observe it again, like we've been doing, but notice where that the shift in the contours is happening. So if this appears flat, which it does, we might have just a line that follows the curve of the question mark shape, but then up here at the top, well, no, I think in this one we're just seeing the side of it. Or perhaps you're seeing a little bit of the bottom of it, in which case you might see a slight curve like this. And then since it's curved around the bottom of the handle, see, like right now, you might read those as flat, or you might read those as curved. So just notice how it's reading to you. I think in the reference image, it's a little bit of a curve like that. And then mostly it's a line that follows the same shape as the question mark shape, because it's a little flat. But in the other ones, oh, let me go back to my original drawing. I keep using my printout of the drawing instead of the drawing itself. So yeah, there was a slight curve there, and then I added that value. But in this one, there's a little bit more of like a flat line. Okay, so I'll make sure I illustrate that. Okay, so, well, let's go ahead and do that now while I'm talking about it. So there's a little bit of a view of the handle like this, and you would read this as more of a straight line that follows that curve. Hopefully that makes sense, how I'm reading that as a straight line or a diagonal line, but it's straight. You know, a diagonal line is straight. It's just at a diagonal. It's not curving. And then these lines will follow the same curve. Pardon my shaky movement there. I think I need a spare piece of paper. I am smearing my left-handedness is smearing all my drawing today. Okay, So same idea here on this horizontal axis. We've got a horizontal curve that goes up, but we just want to keep observing the mug and be aware of where that becomes more straight. So it's going to happen a lot sooner than on the other ones. So we start to just bring awareness to how that line needs to become more and more straight. So only a slight curve until it gets to the equator line, and then below that equator line, things appear to, or the horizontal lines appear to curve down. And that is the same thing that you will see in, in 2-point perspective. The horizon line is in the center of, let's say, this building or this little house, whatever this is, this box, and above the horizon line, the orthogonal lines appear to, angle up, and then below they appear to angle down. So the horizon line, or your eye line, because the horizon line is always going to be at the viewer's eye line. So if you're standing in the middle of a road and you are 5'5", and your friend is standing right next to you and they are 6'5", then the horizon line is going to be a little bit farther away for your friend, right? They're going to be able to see a little bit farther down the road because the horizon line is the viewer's rests where the viewer's eye line, and as you're driving your car, the horizon line is constantly changing as you move in the car, right? Okay, and then we already did this one with our vertical axis. We can kind of start in the middle here and just have like a slight curve out to the right, but observe what your mug is doing if you're drawing a different mug. And then it curves out more and more as we get to the other side, and this would change the way we see text if we had the word coffee on this one rather than the entire word all curving up. Now the word coffee would appear to, the top of the C would angle up a little bit, and the bottom of the C would angle down a little bit, right? The only thing that really changes here is where we moved the horizon line up a little bit. Okay, and then now we're ready to sketch a little bit of value onto this one. We already did the handle. I'm just going to take a 4B or 6B, one of your B pencils, and also the shadow that's falling across the table is going to change slightly here as well. So we're going to be looking down on the shadow a little bit more. We're just going to see a different angle on the shadow. And in the photograph, you could see the table as well. In the other one, you couldn't see the table because I stacked it on something so that I could get my eye level to be at the bottom. So we'll just get our major, all the shadows are going to shift a little bit. So this shadow, we're seeing a little bit more of it. It's a little heavier, but it's all following the same curves. So as you're applying that value, you're going to want to follow the curves of the form as well. And that's that class that I referred back to, Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms, talks about that a lot more as well. Oh, and I guess we are seeing a little bit of the top of the handle here. So you would illustrate that with a little bit of contour lines as well.
So we have someone asking if you can explain how to determine the contour for the shadow, specifically the cast shadow on the table.
Observation. So just looking at the shadow and seeing where in relationship, you know, maybe use a landmark or a cue next to the coffee mug. Like, let's say you've got, some pencils or something nearby, and the edge of the coffee mug and maybe like the edge of the table, you can use that to help you see where that shape should start and end. Like in the photograph, the shadow starts to come out of the bottom of the mug, maybe a little bit, maybe an inch or two past the vertical axis, and then it falls in almost, I could even get it lined up with the box that I drew around it in almost a straight line there. And then it curves up near where I see the back side of the table. So I can just use all of those cues to help me make sure that I get the shape in the right place. And then I like to just use either a horizontal or diagonal line to fill in shadows. And it's helpful if you make the shadow kind of follow the contour of the surface that it's on, right, as well. And since the surface of the table is flat, we want to make the shadow look flat. So either a horizontal line or a diagonal shading line can help push the flatness of the surface of the table.
And just to confirm, the light source is from the upper right?
In those reference photos that I provided, yeah. Yeah, there was a lamp just to the right and above the mug. Okay, all right, so moving on to the last mug view here, which is good timing because we got about 12 minutes left in the class. We're gonna do another triangle, but we're gonna make our zenith point of the triangle at the bottom. But again, you don't have to, measure anything. We're just using the triangle to help us understand the perspective. This mug is not so far above or so far below the horizon line that we're, seeing it technically in worm's eye or bird's eye point of view, but it's helpful to think of it that way because it's a similar view. And I did not draw a perfectly straight triangle there, but I'm not going to worry about it too much because even my mug drawing is going to go outside of the triangle. I kind of just did it because, well, one, it's good to just like think about when you're looking at a geometric form, how you could organize that into, I like to think in terms of diagrams. A lot of my work has diagrams in it, and I'm just a big fan of diagrams, and it's just helpful to like think about how you would organize a shape around that, because everything that we look at is shapes. I'm going to redraw that triangle. I'm like, that's okay that it's not perfectly straight, but it's bugging me that it's not very straight at all. Let me get it in the middle of the paper, and then I can just, I'm using my edge of my spiral as my stopping point there to get it a little more straight. Oh, now it's just more of a, oh, that's good. Okay. It also helps because we're seeing this big mouth at the top of the mug, right? So now we're looking down at it. So we're seeing the open mouth of the mug. So we can use our top of the triangle to help us find that. And then that straight line from the zenith will just help us to organize our verticals. So I'm go ahead and sketch my straight line from the point of at the bottom of my triangle there. And then I'll do this big stretched out oval shape. But again, if you're, drawing a different mug than me, look at what shape you're seeing as you're looking down at it. And then we've got our fishbowl shape, and we've got a curve down. So now everything is, all our horizontals are curved down. In the first view, they were curved up. And yeah, this isn't gonna all fit perfectly tidy inside of my triangle, but that really wasn't the point of it. It was more to just help see those axis points. Okay, and also the handle, we're seeing the top of the handle now. So this is where we want to really get that flat side of the top of the handle and notice where that's coming out in relationship to the opening at the top of the mug. And then yeah, we've got a much more complicated shape happening here on this handle. So it's kind of like a winding staircase here, or a ribbon. Like it's gonna go like that and then taper off. And then then we see the side of it more than the top of it. And there's this curve. And we don't see the profile of the the little lip anymore. We just see it taper off to the side of the mug. So the way I would illustrate those contours is maybe a curved diagonal line like this that starts to become flat at a certain point, and then it curves up. And if I'm losing you here, this is all observation. This is, but one way, if you're really struggling, is you could go back to what I did in that very first video on intro to graphite and drawing forms and take a string, literally take a string and wrap it around. And what is the string doing? Whatever the string is doing is what the contours are doing. So if the string is having to curve right there to wrap around the side of the mug, then you need a curved line. If the string is able to lay flat right there, then you put a straight line. So whatever that string is doing is what your contour lines need to do. Okay, so like right here, I'm seeing the side of the mug, and then this is the little turn where I'm seeing the side of the handle, and that's where I'm seeing the top of the handle. Okay, and then we got to talk about the mouth. I'm running out of minutes here, but if we have to go right up to the end of class, that's okay. I did want to see y'all's drawings when we're done here, but we've got a similar vortex happening at the top of the mug when we're viewing it this way as we did with the apple. So there's a lot happening in the center, the little vortex at the center of the apple. And again, you can take your string. It might be kind of hard to get your string in there, or you can just observe in this handmade mug, it's easy to see some of the lines of clay and how what they're doing there, but it's probably going to be a curved horizontal line that curves up all the way because of the way we're viewing it, and then we're looking down, and then because think about that fishbowl shape on the inside of there, it's kind of curving out like this. So our vertical lines on either side of our axis are doing that. And then we've got the lip, which is pretty flat. So again, take your string. What would the string do? And, really try not to imagine what the contours are doing, because then you're going to start to have a drawing that does not resemble reality, and you're going to get really frustrated. So take the time to, if you're kind of feeling like you'd rather just fudge it and, do whatever you think should be happening there, take the time to observe it and draw it like you're actually seeing it. And then our value is going to follow the same curve to those contours there. I'm going to go ahead and get them in there just because it's going to help me with the shape. So I mentioned I guess that was our premium class last week on drawing eyes, but I made a comment about how my dream for all of my students is for everybody to become like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, how he looks at magazines and just like decodes all this information. So when you look at a form, I want you to immediately decode what the value shapes are doing. What are the shapes of the light and what are the shapes of the highlights doing? Because you can cut out this whole step of sketching all of the contour lines to help you know how to render this in 3 dimensions by just noting how the value is going to follow that curve. So I don't need those lines in there if I'm skilled enough to see them without the lines. They're kind of just like a training wheel step. It's a training wheel on your eyes to help you see the direction that the value shapes are curving and to get away from whatever imaginary thing your brain is trying to tell you that those lines are doing. Like the text on the coffee mug. I've seen so many students render something like this perfectly well, but then go to put the text on and just draw it straight across. And it's like, whoa, whoa, what are we doing there? We're drawing from our imagination. We're definitely not observing what text is doing on a coffee mug if we're not following those contours as we're putting it on. Okay, so yeah, all of this, we've done this before. This isn't our first coffee mug rodeo here. We're just curving everything down now, and I'm moving a little fast since we're at the end of the class. And our vertical lines are going to curve out to the left of that vertical axis and curve to the right of the vertical axis, and all of those value shapes are going to follow the contours that we've outlined and mapped for ourselves. Okay, so, and then the shadow, same thing. We can note where the table is. It's moved up since our viewpoint has moved up. And now we're seeing a lot more of that shadow falling across the table. Okay, I'm gonna be like a cooking show and go back to my completed souffle here. So any questions before we end? If we have any spillover questions, you guys can join me on Instagram to finish asking them as well. But I'd love to see some other people's drawings if we've got a few seconds to put some people up on the spotlight. Oh, very nice. Look at that. Looking great. Oh, yes. Oh, I like how the shape of that one's a little different. Like a teapot. Oh, good. We got a different mug in there. I was hoping we'd get some people challenging themselves. Nice. Yeah, it's always going to be a little harder if you're applying this to a different subject. Cool. Thank you for sharing. All right, we might need a curve down on the bottom of that one. It looked like it was getting a little straight at the bottom. Okay, nice. Yeah, we might need to get those vertical lines to be a little more symmetrical. Nice. Look at that one. That middle one is very strong. Those 3 dimensions are really coming across. Oh, and I like how you pushed your value nice and dark, but kept your sketching lines light. That's the way to do it if you want to erase those contours. Oh, I love how loose and sketchy that is. Very nice. Oh, cool. I like how you adjusted as you went along. Yes, looking good. And yeah, the more details you put in there, the more, zoomed in you get on your contours and making them smaller, the more information you're going to give yourself to. Oh, did you want to hold yours up? You're spotlighted, but I don't see the drawing. Very nice. All right, well, I hope you guys found this helpful. Oh my gosh, look at that. Yes, I like how you put oh, I love it. I love notes. I love notes like that. It's a person after my own heart there. The diagrams and notes, very nice. Oh yes, I love all those notes there too. And those look so 3-dimensional. Those are really strong. And yeah, and if you're drawing later from this YouTube recording, feel free to share your drawings with me. I love to see them. I love getting emails and messages from people who are doing these classes later. And yeah, if you want to join me on Instagram Live, I'll be there for a little Q&A if we've got any other questions about this, or things that are coming up in the series and the lineup of classes. Thank you all for joining me, and have a great evening.